Okay, hi again, everybody. Ended up getting busier than I expected the last 2 weeks, but what the hey, right back to it. So today I'm going to be talking about Robocop 2. Released in 1990, the directing duties here are overtaken by Irvin Kershner, and then Wallen Green, who wrote The Wild Bunch and a couple other things, comes on board as one of the screenwriters, as well as Frank Miller, who, if you're a geek in any capacity, doesn't really need any introduction. In fact, you would think that having him on board as a writer would be really exciting for a franchise like this, and in fact, that was one of the first things I picked up on when I got ready to watch this again for the first time in probably at least 10 or 15 years, maybe honestly even more than that, but I just watched this one once on VHS, like way back in the day. It was a few years, I think, after the movie had initially been released, but nevertheless, I remember really disliking it when I was younger. It wasn't any one particular thing other than something about it just was keeping me at a distance the whole time, and I wasn't really sure what it was. But I'm happy to say that rewatching it this time, my opinion of it did definitely go up at least a little bit. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, I kind of loved Peter Weller in this. In fact, in some ways, he gets to kind of have a little bit more fun with the character and kind of round him out a bit, make him a little bit more sort of multifaceted than he did in the first Robocop in some ways. It could just be that Peter Weller was more comfortable and more in sync with the character at this point as well. But either way, there's lots of really good moments, like stuff that we got in the first film, but really kind of stepped up and refined in terms of that dynamic between the human side of Murphy and the Robocop side. Even in early scenes where he's stopping some thugs from looting, the points where he is threatening them or talking to them strictly, you hear him talking like a robot, but then you see his face like sort of constricting and his teeth gritting and sort of like vaguely emoting in some way on Murphy's human face. So that's a nice touch. That's a really good mix. It just reinforces that part of the reason that Robocop is tough and competent is because Murphy was too. I also really like the way that he plays it in a scene where he basically tells his former wife to kind of like get lost and that, he's never going to see her again. Of course, this is after he's gotten himself in some shit for essentially stalking her and his old son, like driving by their house every day and thinking about, well, what we don't really know. But that moment where he basically tells her that her husband is dead and that she shouldn't come back here and he doesn't know her, it's played so well by Weller that you're not quite sure if this is just the robot talking or if it's the human fighting against the robot's will, or if it's just all Murphy, robot and human, acting this way just to kind of fool his superiors who have really been on his case and threatening to unplug him if he doesn't smarten up, or has he honestly just lost track of who she actually is? And keeping what lies beneath the surface that mysterious and ambiguous only compounds the sense of sadness that you feel in the scene. Elsewhere in the movie, whenever you get to the point where his superiors have had him reprogrammed to essentially make him a big softy and a big incompetent, it makes for some very funny moments when he's lecturing the kids in this very sort of hyper wholesome, corny way. And Peter Weller's delivery and comic timing in these scenes is just like spot on. In particular, the scene where he's lecturing that Pee Wee baseball team is very funny. And I don't know if for a movie this old if this is a controversial opinion to have or not, but whereas a lot of people, including Roger Ebert, really objected to the use of the corrupt young kid who's part of the criminal drug dealing gang here, I actually kind of like that. I mean, even when I saw the movie when I was younger, that part still really stood out to me even then. There's something very unsettling and creepy and unnerving about it, and that's what I think works. And I think that that was deliberate. Like, I think that this was meant to be more genuinely troubling and chilling as an image and a concept than it was to be satirical. It was like they followed that kind of Shane Black formula where at the last minute a character who was written to take maybe like any number of different forms is almost just at random at the last second just made a kid. Like in this case it was just like This could just be another thug. It could be one of Kane's girlfriends or an old cop or, you know what, the heck with it, 10-year-old boy. And when you think about it, with Tom Noonan playing the villain in this one, you know, it's a tough thing to try and sort of out creep or out villain Tom Noonan. So if you're going to compliment him in some way, I think one of the only ways you probably could do something that's only going to up the chill factor rather than undermine it is to do something as gnarly as making this vile character a kid. About Tom Noonan's character Kane, first of all, I think that Tom Noonan's instincts to take this character in more of a hippie direction than it was originally written to be was a smart one, because it makes him a little bit weird, a little bit more sort of stand out, a little bit more off kilter. Having him being converted into a robot that ends up fighting Robocop with his brain trapped inside it, and him hooked up to a system that keeps him hooked on the drug that he's been pushing. That is, I think, a pretty inspired twist. Making him a slave to his own product in the name and under kind of the collar of upholding the law is, you know, about as deeply ironic as you could possibly get. And that's just the kind of down and dirty twist that, you know, someone like Frank Miller likes to put on things. Besides the Kane robots, some of those scenes where they're showing demo footage of failed prototypes for the Robocop 2 unit, that kind of stuff just had me laughing out loud. And I don't know why, because all that happens in these scenes, these big lumbering robots walk into a room, spray bullets around and kill everybody, and shoot themselves in their metallic head. And something about it, maybe it's just the funny stop motion way that they're animated, I don't know what it is, but it comes close to capturing that same sort of nice satirical tone that Verhoeven had in the scenes with ED-209 in the first Robocop movie. Watching these robots break down and kill themselves just had me laughing out loud, and at one point it had me laughing so hard that my poor girlfriend, God bless her for sitting through this with me, she was actually staring at me and looking a little worried. But it does also bring up that interesting discussion that kind of is happening off and on throughout the movie about how part of the reason that Alex Murphy works so well as sort of the base and the foundation for Robocop is because he was raised with a very strong sense of morality and courage and a certain sense of duty. The point, at least to me, is that technological enhancements are just that. They don't so much transform you or convert you to a different mentality or a different being or different personality, as much as they enhance what is already in you, whether that is latent or not. In the case of Robocop, the enhancements turn up the volume on Alex Murphy's integrity. In the case of the Kane version of Robocop 2, the technology turns up the volume on his addiction and his depravity. The fact that the script is able to raise questions like that in your head while you're watching it does at least indicate to me that at some level there was actually some strong writing happening. Despite all the rewrites that this script went through, they were at least initially working with something good. And to go right along with the humor of the failed demos for those Robocop 2 prototypes, the commercials sprinkled throughout this movie are, if anything, even more funny and nihilistic than the first movie. The first one in particular, about the high voltage security system for your car, is priceless. And it is also kind of funny when the commercials in the movie bleed into the Tubi commercials. Now, I do have to say that the difference in the talent behind the camera leaps out at me like right away. Irvin Kershner has directed some very good movies, The Empire Strikes Back being among them, but I'm not sure if he was the right guy for this material, at least not in terms of following up a guy like Paul Verhoeven. And it's not like Paul Verhoeven is the only guy who is capable of making a Robocop movie, but when you look at the style and the really cool use of fluorescent lighting and the gritty look that they give to everything, including Robocop's suit in that first movie, Robocop 2 is shot and lit in a much more conventional commercial way. You get that right away. So while Robocop 1 is very clearly a film from a filmmaker, Robocop 2, even though it was made by a guy with some pedigree, really just feels like it could have been made by just about anybody. The whole suit just has this big sort of shiny blue sheen to it. And from what I read, I understand that the suit designer was actually very happy and excited that he got to spend more time polishing the suit up and fine tuning it. And it's not that it looks bad. It definitely has that nice, shiny exhibition or car show quality to it. But for me, that's part of the problem. I mean, one of the things that I like about, R-rated sci-fi properties like Robocop or The Terminator is that everything feels very lo-fi and gritty. It's still all shot with care and style and purpose, but there's a certain rawness to it that just gives it just a little bit of sort of like grain or gristle, or I don't know what to call it, but like just some nice stylistic roughage that really kind of balances everything out. It looks more like what you would expect to see if you saw Robocop walking around at a con or something like that. Just in general, it makes it feel more like they're trying to reinforce a brand rather than sketch out a character. While we do have Dan O'Herlihy coming back playing the OCP president slash the chairman slash the old man, he does get a bit more to do here than he did in the first Robocop movie, which is nice because he's an excellent actor. But if you really think about the story, he's not all that necessary to it. And while the first one had some great character actors playing some of the sleazebags who made up the higher ranks of the company, just really corrupted everything with their very sort of like boyish, egotistical, personal motives. Here, there's really no one from OCP that you actually honestly love to hate. While it is interesting to note that this movie did essentially predict the city of Detroit filing for bankruptcy as what is essentially a piece of pulpy sci-fi hard R entertainment, does anyone watching that really care about like extended subplots involving like city debt and voluntary fundraising and construction redevelopment and all that crap? I know I don't. And they still refuse to give you any reason, any real concrete practical reason why, despite all his technology, they can't install a goddamn radio like a rover in Robocop somewhere so he can actually call things in and let people know what he's doing, which every cop should, whether they have a robo in front of their title or not. The beeper or a pager, some automatic thing that just sends out this radio signal whenever he's in a situation where he's engaging with people, something. I do like that they make Anne Lewis out to be a fairly tough and competent cop in this movie too. There's a couple of scenes where she handles herself very well without any assistance from Murphy. Although I do still find myself struggling to wonder why she would apparently be so sort of attached and, emotionally invested in Murphy as a partner and friend, considering that before Murphy was killed by the thugs in the first film, their relationship as partners was about like an hour old or something at that point. So yeah, who knows? It's just one of those things that I think that you can't really get around, but sticks out like a sore thumb and just reminds you that this is a fairly contrived sequel in a lot of respects. Because the first movie, to be perfectly fair, even after Anne Lewis figures out that it's Murphy behind Robocop, which, again, if it took her as long as it took her in that first movie, she's not much of a detective. She'll probably be a grunt her whole career. But that movie, I think, understood from beginning to end that while he was acquainted with her and he remembered that, it didn't treat them like they had just been like best buds forever. This feels like, and it's really surprising given the people who wrote it, but it feels like someone looked at the first movie without seeing it and just quickly decided, well, clearly, they were partners before, so they're friends, right? They must be really close. They must be really tight. But neither of the writers credited on this movie feel like the kind of guys who would make such a sort of, amateurish and sort of ignorant mistake. But from what I've read, there was, of course, a fair bit of studio interference throughout the production to the point where scripts elements were being rewritten and trashed and revamped and whatnot, even as the movie was being shot. even really in post-production editing for that matter. So in this case, I'm sort of inclined to let Frank Miller and Wallen Green off the hook. That's just what happens when, as the cliche says, there are too many cooks in the kitchen. However, I think that this kind of scenario can only occur when we're talking about a movie that a studio is determined to push out because they want to make money and they want it to be a product and a brand, rather than coming from some place of creative inspiration like the first one did. Otherwise, why would they even bother trying after all that pre-production hell? I mean, there's enough plot here for an entire series. I mean, the whole thing with the reconstruction and redevelopment of Detroit into Delta City could probably occupy one movie, and I think originally one version of the script it kind of did. The whole plot with the drug dealer Kane is more than enough for one movie. Heck, even the subplot about Murphy being a bit confused about where he lies in relation to his old family could probably be spun off into an entire movie if you really wanted to. I actually personally think that focusing on Murphy's plight with his relationship with his family, and maybe if you wanted to, mixing in some of the elements of the Robocop 2 project with that, would have probably been a better way to go at this point, honestly. Because pairing him up with a replacement drug dealer like Kane in place of Clarence Boddicker, played by Kurtwood Smith in the first one, that's not really going to work the second time round, because in the first one, with Clarence being the one who murders Murphy and thus, sets things in motion for him to become Robocop, there are all sorts of very personal reasons for him to be driven to pursue Clarence, and you understand why they're duking it out. And when they are duking it out, you care. In this one, Kane and Murphy are essentially just at odds because. And it's sort of fun when the two of them duke it out at the end. But as fun as it is to watch the special effects, and they do actually do a pretty good job of cutting in real human work with stop motion animation. There's a couple edits that are actually fairly seamless, even by today's standards. But there's no real soul or stakes behind what's happening in that scene. It's just an exercise, essentially. Though this is still rated R, it is noticeably less violent and less stylistically violent than the first film was. And again, I'm not someone who needs everything to be a complete bloodbath, but when that part of the aesthetic was so stylistically important in the first movie, having it turn a little bit tamer and a little bit more sort of just conventional in its choreography feels like a step backwards, and again gives it one less quality to make it kind of stand out from the pack as far as movies of this ilk go. That may have been because they were trying to accommodate all the toys and video games and merchandising that this property had at this point, because obviously all of that is marketed to kids. But having said that, the franchise still doesn't quite feel like a kid's movie yet at this point. Yet. Robocop 3 is unfortunately a different story, but we'll get there. So while this movie is nowhere near as personal or important to me as the first one is, it still makes an entertaining enough companion piece, I would say. Don't view it as something essential, but if you've seen the first one and you liked it and for some reason you haven't seen this one, this is a nice little entertaining addition. Nothing about this one is going to leave you with a bad taste in your mouth, just maybe some weird questions in your head. Anyway, I think that's about all I can say about this one for the moment. If I have the strength, I'm going to try to talk about Robocop 3. Wish me luck. Yeesh. But look for that sometime soon here, and in the meantime, keep your eyes tuned to the channel. Thank you to all my subscribers, new and existing. It's always nice to see things grow bit by bit. Have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you all later. Peace.